Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar in our series on AI-driven innovation in medical technologies. Today, we'll be presenting on the topic of patent licensing, valuation, and monetization, with an emphasis on AI and medical-related technologies. This is the third episode in our webinar series. We invite you to access our website or our YouTube channel to watch our previous presentations in this series for patent landscape trends and patent eligibility challenges. Our next presentation will occur on May 21st with a focus on patent litigation and enforcement. More details on that webinar will be sent out shortly. A quick note that we'll be recording today's webinar and sending a link to the recording and the slides to everyone who's registered. We'll also put a link into the chat so you can access the presentation slides online. My name is Robert Hirning. I'll be your moderator today. I'm a patent attorney and a principal at SLW, and my practice involves patent preparation and prosecution in a variety of technology areas, including medical devices and related medtech software. During today's presentation, I'll be monitoring the webinar session for any questions from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can enter your question using the Q&A feature with Zoom or in the chat feature in Zoom as well. We'll address the questions either during the presentation or at the end as time permits. Our guest speaker today will be Kent Richardson from the Richardson Oliver Law Group, located in Silicon Valley. Kent and his law firm work with clients in a variety of patent and business matters, including patent sales, licensing, valuation, and prosecution strategy. Kent has extensive experience with licensing and marketing patent portfolios for a variety of companies and technologies. We're looking forward to hearing his insights today on this topic. Thank you, Kent, for joining us. And with that, I'll hand the presentation over to you.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Michelle. Well, this is going to be a fun topic. I think this is one of the more interesting areas. And for those who've heard me speak before on the market, the secondary market for patents, well, you're going to get a little bit of that, but actually a lot of this content is brand new because this content is necessarily brand new. AI and how we use it in our practice and what we can do with it has been a moving target, and it's exciting and interesting. So thanks everybody for joining me, and this is going to be a fun discussion. So what we're going to talk about is AI impact on the market for patents. So what we're talking about market for patents, again, is buying, selling, what happens when people, after they get their patents, what do they do with it? And then what's that impact on patent strategy? How's that AI impacting it? And we're going to talk about, what things you can do with AI that is now possible and it works well. And we're eventually going to get to one of the big ones, the holy grail for you folks. And I'm not going to tell you what that is, so you have to stay till the end. All right. AI in the market. So what are we talking about? This is the secondary patent market. So that means its primary patent market is really that assignment from the inventor to the company, right? That's the first time. Then the company wants to sell it, or the inventor wants to sell it to somebody else. And what we're really talking about is patents for cash. We're not talking about bundling it with technology. We're not talking about it enabling, especially in med device and med pharma. The patents and the products tend to be tightly coupled. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about literally bare patents for cash, okay? And there's a bunch of participants in this market, right? So all of these folks provide a corpus of deal data. So deal data being all the potential patents that are on the market, who's selling. These are brokers and sellers and intermediaries in that marketplace. There's a big chunk of the market that they're responsible for. And then there's another part of this whole market where it's sellers selling directly to buyers, right? So there's two different channels, and they're both active. It's about 2,000 deals hit the market every year. So 2,000 deals, typical deals, sort of around 10 to 20 assets, issued patent, application, that kind of stuff. So you're talking about 20,000 to 40,000 assets per year. Yeah, pretty active market. You're getting a little slice of our annual report. So in that annual report, we have about 350,000 patent assets come in across about 22,000, I think, offerings. Now, you add it all up, it's around 50 billion plus, I think it's 55 billion if you bought every patent for what the person asked for. Let's be clear, people don't do that. But if you just add it all up. That's our annual market report. Comes out in Q3 of the year. And it's now become something that is pretty well understood in the industry as important for understanding what's going on in the market for buying and selling patents. All right. So, like I said, this is the growth of the patent market, and this is the chunk. Oops. This is the chunk that is unsold, and this is the chunk that is sold. You add up again all the asking prices and what that trajectory looks like. Solid growth. This is an active market. It doesn't, it has its ups and downs, but this is pretty active market people are involved in. Importantly to note here, not everything sells. And that's an interesting part of the market to look at because things that don't sell can also get litigated. If you said, okay, what's the median asking prices? So we use median here, and a median is really important to understand. We don't use average. Average is really helpful when you have a bell-shaped curve. This is a long tail distribution. It's actually weird, kind of has a little bump at the beginning and then this long tail. And so we find median is better. So there are some deals that are priced much higher. There's a lot of deals that are priced much lower, so it pulls the median down. We're pretty consistent here for 2025 as far as asking prices. Importantly, these are asking prices. These are not the prices that are actually being sold. Okay. And the discount rule of thumb, call it 35%, but there's a discount curve where depends on who's selling it, how it's being sold, how quickly it sells. Discount might be almost nothing, or it might be much higher than 35% off these asking prices. And by the way, go ahead and feel free to ask questions. Robert's got the ball to interrupt me if somebody has a question they're interested in asking about. So I think the most important thing here, and for those who've heard me tell this story before, is that asking prices and medians are there to help people get some grounding in prices for bare patents on this secondary market. So if you bundle the patents up with the underlying technology and the business, you get a completely different price for those patents. Context matters. The context here is just bare patents on the open market. And I think that's really important. And again, is it 122,000 is the exact right price? No. Is it 1.2 million per asset? Well, you better have some really good reasons why you want 1.2 million for bare patents. And if you want 12 million, you're in a Six Sigma territory. So the most important thing here is we're talking about median prices across a whole bunch of deals with a long tail distribution. This helps people get some grounding in a typical price because we do get sellers come in and say, I want $1 billion per patent, which they're not getting. So, super handy to help people get grounded. And like I said, the story that really made this come home was I was talking to a CEO. He wanted to sell his patents. He wanted $32 million for them. I was like, well, peace. I'd like you to get 32 million, but there's no way we're going to get there. My reading between the lines, he probably had told his investors that what his company was worth or something like that. And he needed his 32 million. I sent him a copy of our paper. He came back and he said, how about $350,000? So with no grounding, no baseline to actually have a sense of where these deals get closed at, it gets really hard to have a discussion where you could actually have a deal close, right? So yeah, you need people to be kind of within an order of magnitude of expectations of each other to be able to close, which sounds crazy. If you're going to buy a house and somebody's wants $1 million and you offered 100,000, you would think that's insane. Nobody would do that. For patents, within an order of magnitude, you might be able to get that deal closed within 3x, so 300% of the asking price and the bid. That's probably a closable deal. So that's how far off bids and asks can be in this market. All right. So just looking at medical. So we use Cypher. For those who don't know, it's machine learning, classifiers, super helpful, not large language models, which is more what I'll be talking about later, but machine learning. And they're pretty handy at looking at large piles of patents and sort of bucketing them better than CPC codes. And so what I did is I took all the patents for the last 2 years that we received by package, and I dropped them into our data, and you can sort of see what's happening in medical, and then by the areas that we typically pay attention to. So medicals actually has some communications related patents. Hardware, not surprising, big chunk of those. Other falls into the generally more medical without any kind of specific category. And then medical software. Not a ton of deals here out of 2,000 deals in a year, but still, 60 to 100 a year, somewhere in that range. And the number of assets are in the order of thousands of assets that are hitting that market every year. And I think that's interesting for the folks on this call is to understand there is a secondary market for medical. It's not as big as it is for, some of the high-tech software folks. Those tend to dominate the market, but there is an active market for medical related patents.
Yeah, Kent, do you think
Yeah.
you could give a rough estimate on like what percentage of the overall market might involve some aspect of, let's say, medical? Is that in the low single digits or again, a rough
It would
idea?
be I would sort of 5-10%.
Okay.
Yeah. And you asked a tough question there because what happens is medical uses more and more as we get more integration of other technologies. So as it brings in more high tech stuff, you get more overlap with high tech. So I'd say clear medical is maybe 5% to 10% maximum, but when you bring in the high tech that is used in medical devices now, it starts to get to be a bigger percentage. Which actually, just to be clear, as a side note, that makes FTO really complicated in medical devices as more of this new technology comes in. All right. So, looking at AI now, I went and I looked at AI as a percentage, or not as a percentage, of the growth in AI related packages. And I assumed that we would have a lot of machine learning back in the 2012s when I did this analysis. Turns out actually it wasn't. Machine learning was definitely much more prevalent back here, and it was still labeled as AI. So we've had a big growth in AI packages, and that's starting to grow more and more, right? So we're at 20% of the deals are now AI related. And we're seeing machine learning growing, and we're seeing a combination of both growing. Other part of this that's interesting, they don't sell as well, not yet anyway. Definitely a growth, definitely a risk. Remember I said those patents that don't sell are interesting to watch because things happen to them, like they get litigated. I think the fact that their AI is underselling in the marketplace, the sales rates are pretty low. Indicates that there is some more risk out there than in other fields. And actually, to that point, some of the foundation model companies and companies that are heavily relying on those models have recently started something called the SAIL Foundation, and it's a shared AI license, royalty-free field of use for foundation models. Each member licenses relevant patents to all other members. And this was just launched 2 weeks ago, I think. If you're interested in learning more about it, if you're heavily relying on foundation models, or if you develop foundation models, you may want to go check out SAIL and see if that's right for you. Okay, so I'm going to transition here. If you're interested in more about the market reports, we have more of them on our website, and you can get all the details there. If you're interested in buying, selling, and you're looking for a broker, or you want to work with a broker, we have a list of all the active brokers on our website. We help people buy and sell, but we always recommend talking to at least 3 people, 3 different companies, to get a feel for who might be able to help you the most. All right, so let's move on to this second part, AI and patent strategy. And I think one of the things is what I want to talk about is, so what problems can AI help with? And notice it didn't say solve. I don't think AI solves the problems completely yet. And it probably will be a while, is my sense. But what can AI really help with? And let's just step back. Remember, I said we use Cypher. If you think about what we're trying to do often in any kind of monetization situation, any kind of assertion, counter assertion, you have your portfolio, and you're looking through that portfolio to try to find patents relevant to your products or to the other person's products, right? And the way that most people have this done is they kind of have it in their head. But if you're going through another portfolio because it's some corp dev, mergers and acquisitions situation, where you don't know the other person's portfolio, or you're trying to evaluate risk of somebody's portfolio, or you're trying to look through your portfolio to license somebody else because they're attacking you and you hadn't planned for that. Well, you're effectively doing a lot of filtering. You're filtering down big portfolios, and you're trying to get to the assets that are most interesting. And I think AI is pretty good at this. It didn't point you at exactly the right assets, but it definitely helps you filter. I think it's also really interesting for developing portfolios. And what I mean by that is, can it find claim sets that you didn't pursue yet that would be really interesting for your business? And that's really the question that I'm interested in. And then the holy grail that I mentioned before, and I'm not telling you what that is until we get to that section. All right. So, the very first question I started to ask myself when I started playing around with AI, and I think the first time I started playing around with AI was 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. And I was generating images on my Mac while on a trip to Europe. And I was specifically trying to generate images for our website, and to make some fun, different kinds of images. And so I've been playing around with it for quite a while, trying to find use cases that we can turn into production use cases, right? And the very first time that I saw AI really work for me at scale, so not just one-offs, not just ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, working on a few set, was I started to run some big portfolios through. And what I mean by this is big portfolios through looking to target a specific company. So this is a really common problem in high tech, where we spend more of our time. You are concerned about XYZ company, and you don't know what's in your portfolio well enough to understand whether it's applicable to that company's products and services. Basically, you're trying to prepare assert or counter assert. But it does happen in medical. This is still actually an issue. And in particular, like I said, with this convergence of technologies, you're getting more high tech in the medical devices. You have more exposure there. You have more exposure to other people's patents. So you're trying to find these patents in your portfolio that are applicable to that other company. And you need to do this at scale. You need to look through hundreds, thousands of patents. So how do you do that? I mean, think about it. Most of the time, you just start out with keywords, right? Keywords, patent rankings. We developed our ranking system maybe 10 years ago now, very similar to some of the other ones that are out there that we open sourced it. So you can download it from our website, works in within Excel. If you're interested in that, go ahead. It's like I said, I think it's under the MIT license. But in any case, it's open source and you can go rank patents all by yourself and not have to expose your rankings or your concerns to anybody else. But what do? You start with keywords, maybe use machine learning to get some better classifications of patents that are more likely. And then it's eyes on patents. You're reading claims and trying to hit products with those claims of the other company, right? That's expensive, it's time consuming, and frankly, it's kind of soul sucking work. And what do I mean by that? If you have 100 patents and you only have a hit on one of them, that's kind of exhausting to look at. So if you've filtered down your patents and now you're down to the last 100 and you only can find one hit, it's exhausting to go through the 99 that you might have to go through, or at least statistically 50 that you have to go through before you find that one. And you don't know if one exists. So you might be at 99 and not know that 100 is the one that's interesting. So it's exhausting and it's hard on you to keep on finding no's, finding, oh, no hit, no hit, no hit, no hit. So can LLMs help with this? That's the question that I wanted to ask. And the short answer is yes. Actually, astoundingly, kind of yes. But they are probabilistic machines. So, I'm a computer engineer, software engineer. I'm used to having inputs come in and getting a single answer out. And I'm an engineer, so I also know that sometimes machines break and you need to, it doesn't always work, but you're used to put this in, do this function, get this up. These are not like that. You can control some of that, but at its heart, it's a probabilistic uh, decision that comes up or result. So the first thing you have to realize is no matter what you do, it's going to get it wrong sometimes. Like it's just going to. So sometimes it'll get it right, sometimes it'll get it wrong. The other thing is they do hallucinate. They're better at controlling hallucinations. I know people get really hung up on this. I find they hallucinate less often now. I always sort of say, okay, well, what's our benchmark for thinking about LLMs? Well, we all have false memories. We all forget things, or we all think something might have happened at one point. So in some respects, if our benchmark is no hallucinations, then that means that people aren't qualified to do this either. So I think you have to live with the fact that you're going to get probabilistic results where sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it'll just make up stuff. And I think this last one is maybe more surprising. They're kind of finicky. You can see how fast LLMs are changing if you're following all that's going on with Claude and Codex right now in code from ChatGPT, and how fast they're changing. Things you could do today, you couldn't do 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and 6 weeks ago. In fact, parts of this presentation I redid over the weekend because I couldn't do some of it as easily as I could then. So they're changing, they're finicky, and I think there's this other component to this, which is they can be frustratingly annoying. So they're a computer, and we forget that they're computers because they answer like human beings. So they appear to be lazy. They appear to be insincere, where a human being would never be like that. And so it's very easy to fall in the trap where you're like, oh, right, this is a computer. It has no knowledge, it has nothing. So you can get annoyed pretty easily on occasion. So all of that, let's go on to this next question though. Can you actually find interesting paths? So what can you do to manage these shortcomings, right? And the first thing you have to do is say, where's my solution space going to be? And what I mean by that is, what is it that I think I can get out of this LLM in by asking these questions? So the first thing is limiting how much you ask a model to do. It's called controlling the surface. So you really, if you have a small, dumb model that runs really fast, which can be really useful for some things, don't ask it to do very much. And I think that's just you have to have a sense of how complicated a question you're asking before you launch into any kind of attempt to use an LLM. So we've done things like reduce the complexity by breaking questions down into multiple stages, where we ask the first part, then the second part, then the third part. And that's really helpful in limiting that surface. How big of a question? How many factors are you asking it to evaluate? How many pieces of data that are disparate? How are you asking that question? Are you asking it in a way that causes the machine to have to think harder? And I'm just stepping back from this. I think actually patent attorneys in particular are really well suited for working with LLMs. I think we actually, we have a superpower we didn't know. And that superpower is we can be very precise about being technical and also understanding when we're being vague and when we're being precise. If you think about it, that's kind of the definition of claims drafting. And that's really helpful for LLMs. So, you all have a superpower. All right. The next one is reducing context pollution. So what I mean by that is you keep on asking within one chat with GPT, for example, ChatGPT, within one session, if you keep on asking, what happens is the session grows and grows and grows. And the things that you asked earlier on are impacting what the questions you're asking now. So if you start a new session, there's no pollution. One of the ways that you can manage this, if you think about asking questions about a patent portfolio, is you don't want to ask, hey, does this company infringe this patent? And then in the same session say, hey, does this company over here infringe this other patent? How about this third patent? If you ask all of those questions in the same session, you're getting pollution of decisions made about the first patent and the second patent and the third patent. So you really need to separate all these questions out and ask them separately. All right, so another thing you have to do is accept that this is probabilistic. And that means you have to have repeated runs if you want to dial in your certainty. So the LLMs don't calculate a single correct answer. Think of it as a probabilistic outcome. It's choosing one or more likely answers from many possible ones. So repeated prompts yield different results, and you can then look at those differences and decide which one is the one you're going to vote is the right answer, right? So if you have multiple runs, you can select from the answers that are being provided. Sometimes it'll say, well, I can't answer that. Or sometimes it'll say, well, it's this product. And then this other one will say it's this product. And then another one will say it's some other product. Well, voting says maybe it's those two that agreed. So you have to think about, I have to ask the same question multiple times in independent sessions, reducing context pollution and then voting. And you see that in some of the more advanced frontier models. They will go and ask the same question multiple times and then vote. The other thing you have to understand is this is a moving target. So measuring is important. Understanding what answers you got before and how things have changed now is really important to understand. And this looks like software in production environments. You made some changes. Things are now different than before. How did those change? And so you need to have some sense of what you were doing before, how were those being answered versus what you're doing today. So, what we did is let the LLM pick the strongest fit patents against a specific target company. That's basically the prompt we were using. It is a complicated, long prompt. We use the LLM to help write the prompt. We ran the same 250 families through the same prompt, all of them independently, and we ran them more than 50 times through GPT-120. Now, GPT-120 is from OpenAI. It's an open source model, and it's kind of enthusiastic. So you have to smack it down a little bit and make sure that its wings are clipped a little bit because it'll try to be too agreeable with you. But you can get there. We ran it for 50 times. I was on another business trip and I left it running on our machine. So we ran this all locally. So I ran it for 8 days of compute time. It's about 160 million tokens. If I send it up to OpenAI, we'd get that done in half a day. But we generated 20,000 scores. And here's what the results look like. Oh, the last step in this. We use the scores to help us figure out where we would want to go pick if we were lawyers. But we also did something else. We made our own picks first and we didn't tell the LLM. So we have two pieces of data here. We have the ones that we think are going to be better already, but we're not telling the LLM. And we're assuming that the lawyers are going to have to pick from the results. Okay, so this is what you end up getting when you run that kind of test. These are the ones that we had picked and knew. Those are all the runs for those. So the first thing you can see is there's a distribution on these runs, on these families. And it is clearly, this group is clearly above this group. I said I'm a software engineer, architect. I'm actually for communication systems. So I'm a communications person. And that looks like a signal to me. And that looks like a signal in a kind of a messy, chaotic channel, but that looks like a signal. And it is. It's clearly the case that the LLM, with no knowledge of the patents that we had picked, was able to identify patents that were more likely to be interesting to us for the analysis. And I think that was sort of the first time that I'm like, at scale, this is really working. And I think that's an important thing to understand. So the attorney selected ones, these ones, if you run it by the LLM, sometimes they ended up down here. Sometimes they were here. Most of the time they were in this range. Most of the time you would be able to pick these ones out if you run enough, if you run the prompt enough times on those families. So this is great news. And in fact, this portfolio was a little bit tough for the target because we knew that it wasn't a great portfolio. Even the ones we had picked were like, okay, these are better, but they're not going to be the best ones that I'd really like to use for that specific target company. So I think the LM actually did fairly well. It picked the ones that we said, yeah, that's kind of what we're interested in. If you ran this 4 times, for those who are statistics folks, you'd reach a P of less than 0.05, which is statistically interesting for people.
Yeah,
okay.
Kent.
Yeah.
So, question about this. So, one of the frustrations in working with LLMs, even when you have a very specific prompt and a very, limited context of what I'm trying to look at, I can't reproduce the results. And I'll get a different answers at different times or different variations of these answers. So, what do you think is the sort of the solution? Is it just to run more to run more model runs and to ask more queries?
Yeah, so there is a way to do this, actually. You can actually get the same result every time. You can set the seed, the random number seed that the model starts with, and you will get the same answer every time. So that is a possibility, but that's not kind of what you want. The other thing you can do is I find that they put the temperature too high on the frontier models. So you can turn the temperature down for legal work. 0.2 is better. For writing, it's typically 0.8. For something more creative, it'll be north of 1. So you can turn the temperature down and you'll get a more constrained set of answers. It'll be less creative, but that's maybe sometimes not what you want, right? So you, so those couple factors, and that's why we built what we built, right? So we built our own ability to break long, big prompts up into small prompts and run them on our own hardware so we can see what's going on and look at the details of how many tokens is it using, how much variation in the results are we getting, and get a much greater detailed view of what's going on. So our hardware is not super fast by any stretch, but we can see it, see what's going on. And so some of it is they hide the frontier models necessarily hide all this detail for me. And so yeah, that part is kind of frustrating. But I think what you do see here is there is a lot of variation in these answers, right? But there's a clear signal. And you do have to run it. And you have to run it, for that prompt, we'd have to run it 4 times to get a decent chance of identifying the patent families that the lawyers would have picked. The other thing was interesting. The lawyers picked 4 families. I'd argue that 3 of them were really better picks, and one was kind of not that great. And it still came out reasonably well. It also sort of says why you have so much overlap in this area. So I think you can get there. It's hard to get the visibility. Unfortunately, some of this just involves rolling up your sleeves and running some of the models locally. I was traveling a couple of weeks ago and I was running some of the models on my machine, on this machine, and the GPU gets so hot, it gets up to about 80, 90 degrees, that the G key on my laptop is hard to use because it gets so hot. So some of this stuff is, it feels like the automotive industry right before the Model Ts were going, where everybody had to be somewhat of their own mechanic and be able to have to solve a lot of problems. It still feels like we're all kind of at that. Maybe we're just at the Model T, but you're still going to have to roll up your sleeves and fix something under the hood every once in a while. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer to the question, Robert.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next question. Going back to that, actually, this category. So I was in-house for about 10 years. And at one point, I had a team of about 10, 15 people working for me that were doing this kind of work. Find the patents, find the claims that would be applicable to that company, and we would generate licensing money from it. And we were generating about $200 million a year in licensing money. And so you can afford to have a team of 10, 15 people doing this job, right? Because you're making enough money off of it. But that's not where most people are. But LLMs can do this at a much cheaper cost. And that's exciting. This not only does cover that soul sucking work, but you can lower your cost a lot. And that's exciting. Especially, we see this in high tech, where they have very small teams. They don't know what's in their portfolio to a great degree. And this is now a new solution for them. All right. So can LLMs mine for new claim sets? So LLMs are already helping people draft. They're actually phenomenal. A friend of mine, he's a professor over at Berkeley, and he said, oh, we should develop something to test whether LLMs can draft. And maybe we should have people evaluate whether it was written by a person or written by an LLM. And I said, I think that ship already sailed. I think the LLMs write better already, plus or minus. They don't write perfectly, and the human beings still got to be there for sure. But wow, they can generate some amazing stuff. But the question is, can they go and mine for new claim sets? So here's your opportunity. You have a whole bunch of pending patent applications with new claim sets open for you. You can actually go and file new claim sets. And now, can you go find ones that you could write that read on that company's products? That's the question. That's expensive to do. You have to go and filter, you have to ask your team, you have to go find the patents, then you have to go and see if you can map them against the company's products. And my question was simply, can you go and get an LLM to do this? So the claims have to be supported by the spec, they have to be distinct from the existing claims, and they have to be relevant to that XYZ's products, right? And the way we do that now is you have attorneys read the specs, you find target products, you filter down first to find the patent applications are more likely to be interesting, and then it's just eyes on specs and brainstorming, and it's expensive. It's slow, and it's definitely hard to scale. A lot of the knowledge is kept in the patent attorney who's doing the work. So can they help? Well, same set of problems. They're probabilistic. They hallucinate. But yeah, they can do this. Here we're asking the LLMs to do something different than just rank patents for. We're asking it to model draft claim themes. So think about that. We're asking for it to model to draft claim themes. And hallucinations become much more annoying here. When I ran this, we had about 100 defects or phantom product ideas, or we had a whole bunch of cleanup that we had to do. So again, we have to control the surface, constrain the target products that we're going to try to target. We're going to say this is the group of products we're trying to target at that company. We're going to ground all those outputs. So that means whatever we're asking the model to do, if you say, hey, there's this claim theme that you haven't claimed yet, great. Tell me where in the specification, paragraph numbers, that claim theme is supported. You have to cite the sections of the specification. You don't just get to randomly tell me, oh, there's all these fancy, nice claim themes. The other thing is, when I said you had to constrain the surface, we just sort of broke that rule because we're giving a big chunk of the specification to the LLM to look at, and that's a big surface for it. So, now you've got to deal with that problem. And the other thing that we did is we tried different models. So for people who haven't played around with this stuff, there are dozens of good quality models. There are thousands and thousands of models out there. And depending on what you want, there's at least half dozen that are interesting to evaluate at any one time. So we ran the same prompts through on different models and see where their convergence were. So the LLMs find the themes, they remove duplicates, and they remove duplicates in two ways. Duplicate themes within themselves, but duplicates in the sense of, oh, you're already pursuing that claim. Great. What they then do is they take all of those themes that they found that are ranked, and they go and present to you and let you pick which ones you're interested in. So I did this for about over 100 families. We did a multi-stage prompt where we extracted technical substance. We took a catalog of the existing claims, and then we had new proposed claims themes made. Then we went and we ranked those, and we ended up, getting a really interesting set of patent claims from a pool of about 100 or more patent families. So it's about 2,500 LLM calls to get this done. Ultimately, the human is selecting the highest ranked results. So you get 15 results at the end, and the human's going to probably pursue 5 to 10. So give you a sense of what that pipeline looks like. We had about 1,500 or more raw themes. We end up removing duplicates. We consolidate themes. We put some quality filters on. We do some cross-model testing. We kill a few by using a high-end model to look at the results, and we presented 14 to the client. And then the client's lawyers are doing the last mile of picking which ones they want to go after. Pretty interesting stuff. It wasn't cheap to do this, but it was super effective ultimately something the client just wouldn't have had the resources to do. And it's really exciting to be able to show them in their own pending cases where they could go and get new claim sets. Okay. Last topic, product manager FTO guide. Okay, so that's my holy grail. This is something that clients are asking all the time. Hey, can't you just give us some way to get us to FTO, some mechanism, some Excel spreadsheet that, I can just use, and then I'll know which product features I can include and not include. I consider this sort of the holy grail. This is what clients ask for all the time. And the way it's done is it's usually in people's heads. There's varying degrees depending on your industry and how you manage your FTO. Some industries like high tech don't manage it at all. They're just like, we don't have FTO. We're just going to go ahead. Other industries manage it very deeply, very carefully. And so, depending on what industry you're in, you're going to have different ways of doing this. But imagine this scenario. New product manager wants to launch a new product and wants to understand FTO. So the problem with new products immediately is it's a new product. You may not know that landscape. So what you have to do is you have to hire lawyers to read all the claims, map the product specs to those claims, and write memos per family group. You're having to meet with the program managers. They're frustrated because it feels like they're standing on sand because you get a set of answers and then you get another set of answers, another set of answers. It's expensive, it slows, it's hard to scale, and relies on institutional knowledge. So if that lawyer moves to another job, you've lost institutional knowledge. And then updating that analysis is difficult because this is a perpetually moving landscape. You have pending applications that are not issued yet. You have things that are still within the 18-month or 12-month publication window, and you haven't seen those yet. So what can you use the LLM for? Well, we did ingest all the patent claims and extract claim elements. Then we went through on a per family and we selected the broadest product relevant claim. So per family, what's the claim that's broadest covers it? And if there's more than one claim, then you just put two claims in. Then we went and grouped all the elements into design dimensions. So the ways that a product manager would go and think about designing a product. The interesting thing on this part was we were able to do that using the frontier model LLMs with this extracted information, only using patent information and not the information from the product manager unit. So we actually created the dimensions only from the patent information. And when we showed it to the product managers, just to show them where we were at, they were shocked at how close we were to the way they thought about it. And the product managers enter their product spec in kind of a natural language way. You press a button and the LLM does an element by element mapping and tells them where they've got heat in their product features. So you can actually screen a new product in a matter of minutes, minutes being 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to what would normally take maybe weeks. So here's an example of what it looks like. Along the side is you have all these dimensions. There's a characteristic of the product. These are example products. Some of them are real products, and some of them are synthesized products we actually had the LLM create the spec for to test for corner cases. So what does this look like? It looks like a test bed for software. What we're doing again is we're letting the product manager enter the natural language description. So they for each one of these dimensions, they write some text saying, here's how we're designing this part of it. Then we have the frontier model. So those are the high end, like the OpenAI ones and Claude and stuff like that. One of those models takes control of this and runs the process steps. So that it's not actually making the decisions about the claims. per se. What it's doing is it's orchestrating the um, the testing. So it runs all these scripts, all the independent tests um, through. Then it basically gathers all that information together and tells you where you've got problems. If this column basically had no problems for this product has a ton of problems. And so the product manager can say, well, I'm more like this product. Maybe I'll take these components here and this component from this one, and then put together a product. Say, hey, can I get a product here that's FTO clear that's still compelling? Um, Ultimately, there was some other tricks we had to use. We ended up having to use a decision tree and not let the LLM make the final verdict. So I use Python. I say we, this one was me. I use Python to get the final verdict because I don't trust the LLMs to count. They're pretty good at counting now, but sometimes they still can't count. Like the running joke is count the number of R's in raspberry and it still gets it wrong. So there's some things that we still won't let the LLM do. And then the last thing is to recognize that no matter how carefully you do this, there are going to be a group of patents that are oddballs that you just have to evaluate individually for every product. Typically, they cover oddball characteristics of the product. So the product manager gets a really good understanding of those and decides they don't want to include any of those product features. Okay,
Maybe a quick
yeah,
question,
sure.
Kent, going back to this. Yeah, could you give, I guess, some explanation of sort of the source data? Like again, are you searching like all patents available in a particular classification? Is that based on
Yeah.
feature? And yeah, like how much filtering actually got into before you let this loose, right?
So this was weird in that for this product space, I could get you to 500 families and that's it. Like that kind of space. It's just that's all there is in the world on this technology for these products. It's more a consumer product than it is a medical. It'd be a simpler medical device kind of thing.
Yeah, so
So
for example, if in the medical space, if you had a particular again product, a particular application of that product, you could at least again constrain it from millions of patents down. I'm talking hundreds, but now I can
yes,
actually set this loose and look at the individual dimensions and
correct.
combinations. Okay.
Yeah, that's good point. And yeah, sorry if I didn't make that clear at the beginning. The most important thing is this was a constrained enough problem. Definitely cannot clear FTO on an iPhone. It's not going to happen. Okay, yeah. So that's a great question. And so this was unusual for me because it's rare that I run into a product where I can say, nope, this is the totality of all the patents applicable to it, including pending stuff. Okay, some observations. You can now do work you couldn't imagine before. You just couldn't imagine being able to afford it. So the very first thing I'd recommend to everybody is to step back and just brainstorm what could we never do before because we are so constrained by the burden of the budget and what we've always never been able to do. I'd say that we've forgotten how to be creative about what we can do. And so I just challenge everybody to just go, wow, what if we just had infinite resources? What can we do? And then start with an idea list because I think what you'll find is you'll find one or two ideas that you dismissed 20 years ago as wouldn't it be great if we do that? And you've forgotten what some of those things are. Because I know some of these things were like, wow, I can now do this. I hadn't really thought of that before. Um, Next thing is LLMs produce a lot of information. Much of it is not very interesting. It's almost just piles of not interesting stuff. So you now have a whole different problem. Like I had to create a tool to manage how the project view was being handled because typically we just keep everything in folders, but it generates so many files and so much data and so many ways of viewing the data that our folders started to explode. So I had to create a whole another tool to just watch what data analysis we're doing. I think this next point is super important. You need to encourage people to try things. And what I mean by that is we bought hardware to run our own models on, not because we thought it was going to be cost effective, but because they're just sitting there all the time. And it's effectively at this point now nearly free to try things. And so we try to encourage our team to just try it. Don't be afraid. I grew up when you could do a search and the search would take, you know, 5 minutes of compute time and cost you $2,000, right? So this is 30 years ago. We're not there with API pricing for some of these models, but you can run up bills pretty fast. And that's somewhat discouraging for people. So find a way to ensure that people are just feel unconstrained to try things. Harnessed LLMs produce way better results for the same cost. So that's what I mean by controlling that surface, controlling what you're doing with the LLM. Don't let it run willy-nilly all over the place. Rerunning prompts and voting, that's what people are doing. You don't get to eliminated errors, right? We're not eliminating, we're reducing errors. That's the win line. Corollary to that, your confidence is dictates how many runs. So how confident you want to be in your answer tells you how many runs and how many models you need to try. Multiple runs, to the earlier point, do give a more consistent answer, but that answer might still be wrong. It could be consistently wrong, right? There's biases built into these models. It can be wrong. And, to that point, not all models are the same. Try them out. Shockingly effective on some of the small models because they run so fast at things like extraction. And then, they're just, it's fun to play with. I don't know that it substantially lowers the cost of some things, but you get so much better results. In other things, you would never afford to do it. You would never want to pay for it. And so now you can try things you can never afford to do before. All right, I'm going to pause there, see if anybody has any questions. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I don't think we have any other questions right now from the audience. Yeah, I think maybe more just an observation from my colleagues here that I guess, yeah, harness LLM also sometimes refers to a little bit of a different context. Going back to your previous slide, Kent.
Yeah, yeah,
So, um, yeah, exactly.
that's
What do you
true.
mean by, yeah, I guess in this case, it's just more adding more, I don't know, it's constraints or
Yeah.
rules. Is that the way to think about it, right?
Well,
Yeah,
we harness it in the sense
yeah,
of, and not in the
yeah,
not in the typical
yeah.
way, but we literally run it and we watch it and we have it. We are watching what it's creating all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we're able to swap it out, and we're able to break down how much it is processing at any one time, such that we have a big long task and we break it into multi-stages. And the interesting thing is the LLMs actually are really good at helping you do that for some things. For other things, they're a disaster at. So you can actually take a big complicated prompt and ask the LLM to help you break it down into pieces, then run each piece by itself. So yeah, you're right on the hardest, maybe not
Yeah,
the right word there.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, no other no comments here. No, I think the definitely given a lot of creative approaches here to think about, and both for med tech, for AI, and really just patent FTO and drafting as a whole. So went in a lot of directions here today. So yeah, thank you, Kent. Definitely appreciate your time and real world insights and some of the experiments you've been doing here. Very useful. So we really appreciate your time here.
Yeah, yeah, great. Well,
Uh,
everybody have fun. Take care.
all right, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.